If you're so disabled, you should have been more careful playing soldier there.
You don't deserve to share this country with him. You disgust me completely, Thea.
The security camera footage from Judge Judy's courtroom on March 8, 2024 captured the exact moment a woman's life was destroyed in front of 12 million live viewers. What makes this case absolutely insane isn't just that Jessica Martinez publicly mocked a disabled Purple Heart veteran in the most disgusting way imaginable. It's not even that she doubled down on her cruelty when given the chance to apologize. What broke the internet and generated over 80 million views in just 72 hours was the devastating 10-word sentence Judge Judy used to obliterate this woman so completely that her name became the most hated in America overnight. I'm going to tell you that sentence, but first you need to understand exactly what this Karen did to earn the kind of public humiliation that destroyed her career, her reputation, and her entire privileged life in less than 15 minutes of courtroom testimony. Jessica Martinez walked into that courtroom believing her expensive lawyers and her six-figure salary as a luxury real estate agent would intimidate everyone into submission. She was 42 years old, wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than most people earn in a month, carrying a Hermes handbag that could have fed a family for half a year, and sporting a diamond Cartier watch that glittered under the courtroom lights like a monument to her own arrogance. Her perfectly styled blonde hair, her designer sunglasses perched on top of her head, and the way she clicked her Louboutin heels across the floor announced to everyone watching that she considered herself better than every single person in that room. She had that specific kind of entitled smirk that wealthy people wear when they've never been told no in their entire lives, the kind of expression that makes your blood boil because you know they've gotten away with treating people like garbage for decades. She moved to the defendant's table with the casual confidence of someone who thought this entire lawsuit was beneath her. Just another inconvenience that her money and lawyers would make disappear like every other problem she'd ever faced. Across from her sat Michael Torres, and the contrast couldn't have been more stark or more heartbreaking. He was 36 years old, a former Marine Corps sergeant who'd served 2 brutal tours in Afghanistan between 2009 and 2014. He sat in his wheelchair wearing a simple navy blue button-down shirt that had been washed so many times the color was starting to fade, and a pair of khaki pants that were clean but clearly old. On his chest, just above his heart, he wore a small American flag pin next to his Purple Heart medal. His hands were folded in his lap, and despite everything he'd been through, despite the humiliation he was about to describe, he sat with the quiet dignity and military bearing of a man who'd faced actual enemies and real danger. His wife sat behind him in the gallery, a woman in her early 30s with worry lines etched into her face and eyes that had cried too many tears over the past few months. Their 2 children, ages 6 and 8, were being watched by Michael's mother because no parent wants their kids to hear what he was about to testify about. Michael's wheelchair was a constant reminder of the IED explosion that had torn through his convoy in Kandahar province on September 17, 2013, an attack that had killed 2 of his fellow Marines and left him with injuries so severe that he'd spent 8 months in Walter Reed Medical Center learning how to live with chronic pain and limited mobility. He worked part-time at the VA helping other veterans navigate their disability claims because even though his body was broken, his commitment to serving others never died. Before we get to the absolutely shocking thing that Jessica said to this decorated war hero in a shopping center parking lot on Valentine's Day 2024, before I tell you about the evidence that made the entire courtroom gasp in horror, and before I reveal Judge Judy's devastating 10-word destruction that will give you the most satisfying feeling of justice you've experienced all year, I need you to do something for me right now. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you've ever witnessed someone disrespecting our military veterans in public. Hit that subscribe button immediately because what you're about to see is the most powerful moment of accountability ever captured on television. And if you love watching entitled people get exactly what they deserve, you need to be here for every single upload. I'm bringing you the cases that restore your faith that justice still exists in America, the moments when arrogance collides with consequences so brutally that the internet explodes with millions of people sharing the exact second when someone's world collapses. This particular case generated more outrage, more viral shares, and more real-world consequences than anything Judge Judy has ever presided over. And by the time I'm finished telling you this story, you'll understand exactly why Jessica Martinez's name will be remembered as a cautionary tale for decades to come. The incident that brought Michael Torres and Jessica Martinez into Judge Judy's courtroom happened on February 14, 2024, Valentine's Day, in the parking lot of an upscale shopping center in West Los Angeles. Michael had driven to the mall that afternoon to pick up a gift for his wife, navigating his specially modified vehicle with hand controls because his legs couldn't operate regular pedals anymore. He'd been looking forward to this small gesture of love, something normal and simple that didn't involve doctors or physical therapy or the constant reminder of what he'd lost in Afghanistan. When he arrived at the shopping center around 2:30 in the afternoon, he immediately noticed that someone had parked in one of the designated handicapped accessible spaces without displaying any disabled parking placard. The vehicle was a silver Mercedes S-Class, gleaming and expensive, taking up the wider space that Michael needed to safely exit his vehicle and transfer to his wheelchair. He circled the parking lot twice looking for another accessible spot, but every single handicapped space was occupied by legitimately disabled drivers. The pain in his back was increasing with every minute he spent sitting in the car, the old injuries from the IED blast sending sharp signals up his spine that reminded him why he needed these accommodated spaces in the first place. Michael finally parked his vehicle directly behind the illegally parked Mercedes and waited, hoping whoever owned it would return quickly so he could politely explain the situation and ask them to move. He sat there for nearly 20 minutes, watching shoppers walk past with their Valentine's Day purchases while his back screamed in agony and his patience slowly eroded. Finally he saw her. Jessica Martinez emerged from the shopping center carrying multiple designer shopping bags, laughing on her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd been blocking a disabled veteran from accessing the store for almost half an hour. Michael rolled down his window and called out to her politely, his voice steady and respectful despite the pain he was experiencing. "Excuse me, ma'am. You're parked in a handicapped space without a placard. I really need that spot. Could you please move your vehicle?" Jessica stopped walking, turned to look at him with an expression of pure annoyance, and rolled her eyes so dramatically that other shoppers nearby noticed. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge his wheelchair or his obvious need. Instead, she said something that would haunt her for the rest of her life and eventually be played millions of times across every social media platform in America. What Jessica didn't know was that her friend, standing next to her on the sidewalk, had started recording the conversation on her phone because she thought Jessica's attitude was funny and wanted to capture it for their group chat. What Jessica couldn't have imagined was that this video would end up as evidence in a courtroom, broadcast on national television, and shared so many times that her face would become the symbol of everything Americans despise about entitled privilege. The security cameras mounted on the shopping center captured the entire interaction from multiple angles, providing clear audio and video that would later corroborate every single word of Michael's testimony. Jessica looked at Michael sitting in his modified vehicle, saw his wheelchair visible in the passenger seat, noticed the veteran license plates on his car, and made a conscious choice to be cruel. She told Michael that if he was so disabled he should have been more careful playing soldier in whatever war he went to. She said that real heroes don't need special parking spaces because real heroes don't spend their whole lives playing the victim card for sympathy. She laughed when she said it, a sharp cruel sound that cut through the parking lot air, and her friend laughed too, both of them treating Michael's service and sacrifice like it was some kind of joke they'd encountered during their shopping trip. Michael sat frozen in his vehicle, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, fighting back the surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. The mockery triggered something deep in his PTSD, bringing back memories of the explosion, the screaming, the moment he realized he'd never walk normally again, the faces of the Marines who didn't make it home. Other shoppers had stopped to watch this confrontation, several pulling out their own phones to record what was happening because even strangers recognized that something terrible was unfolding in front of them. One older gentleman, himself a Vietnam veteran, approached Jessica and told her she should be ashamed of herself for speaking to a Purple Heart recipient that way. Jessica's response was to tell this elderly veteran to mind his own business before she called security on him for harassment. She tossed her shopping bags into her Mercedes, climbed into the driver's seat, and before pulling out of the handicapped space she'd illegally occupied, she rolled down her window and told Michael that maybe if veterans spent less time complaining about their problems and more time moving forward with their lives, they wouldn't need special treatment from society. Then she drove away, leaving Michael sitting alone in his vehicle, shaking with a combination of rage, humiliation, and profound sadness that a fellow American could treat him with such contempt. The video footage that multiple witnesses had captured spread across local social media within hours, and by the next morning Michael Torres had been contacted by dozens of people who'd witnessed Jessica's cruelty and wanted to help him hold her accountable. A veterans' rights attorney named Robert Chin saw the footage on Twitter and immediately reached out to Michael offering to represent him pro bono because he believed Jessica Martinez needed to face consequences for her disgraceful behavior. Michael initially hesitated to file a lawsuit because he'd never been the type of person to seek attention or demand compensation for his suffering, but his wife convinced him that this wasn't about money, it was about standing up for every veteran who'd ever been mocked or diminished by someone who'd never sacrificed anything for their country. Michael filed his lawsuit on February 28 seeking $45,000 in damages for emotional distress, public humiliation, and the triggering of his PTSD that required additional counseling sessions he couldn't afford. What Michael didn't expect was that Jessica Martinez would respond to his lawsuit by filing a countersuit claiming that he'd defamed her reputation and harassed her by making the incident public, demanding $75,000 in damages and claiming that Michael had weaponized his veteran status to destroy her career and turn people against her. Judge Judy Scheindlin had reviewed both case files for 2 full days before the courtroom proceedings began, and anyone who knew her could recognize the particular intensity in her expression when she'd encountered something that personally offended her sense of justice. She'd read the depositions, watched all the video footage from multiple angles, reviewed the social media posts that Jessica had made after the incident where she complained about professional victims trying to ruin her life, and she'd even made several private phone calls to verify certain facts that would become critical during the trial. What the audience watching that morning didn't know was that Judge Judy's own father, Murray Blum, had served as a dentist in the Army during World War II, and she'd grown up with a profound respect for military service that made Jessica's behavior particularly reprehensible in her eyes. She'd also contacted the Veterans Affairs Office to verify Michael's service record, his Purple Heart citation, and the medical documentation of his injuries, wanting to ensure she had every piece of information necessary to deliver the justice this case demanded. When Judge Judy entered the courtroom that morning and took her seat at the bench, the atmosphere was already charged with anticipation because word had spread through the television production community that this case involved something explosive. She looked at Michael Torres sitting quietly in his wheelchair, his posture respectful and his expression calm despite the emotional difficulty of having to relive his humiliation in front of cameras and a studio audience. Then she turned her attention to Jessica Martinez, who sat at the defendant's table checking her phone with that same dismissive arrogance that had gotten her into this situation in the first place, and Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into that dangerous expression that longtime viewers recognized as the warning sign before an absolute destruction. "Before I hear opening statements," Judge Judy said, her voice carrying that deceptively calm tone that preceded her most devastating takedowns, "I want to make something very clear to everyone in this courtroom. We're not here to debate whether veterans deserve respect. We're not here to question whether disabled parking spaces serve a legitimate purpose. We're here to determine whether Ms. Martinez's actions caused quantifiable harm to Mr. Torres, and whether her countersuit has any merit whatsoever." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room, and then added in a voice that dropped even lower, "And I suggest that everyone present remember that this courtroom runs on facts, evidence, and the truth, regardless of how much money anyone's wearing on their wrist." Now, before Judge Judy absolutely obliterates Jessica Martinez in a way that will make your heart soar with satisfaction, I need you to hit that like button right now if you believe our veterans deserve better than this kind of treatment. Drop a comment saying justice served if you're ready to watch this entitled woman learn that consequences are real. This is about to get intense, and you don't want to miss a single second of what happens next. Judge Judy turned her attention to Michael Torres and asked him to describe in his own words what happened on February 14th in that parking lot. Michael spoke quietly but clearly, his military training evident in the way he presented facts without embellishment or unnecessary emotion. He explained how he'd needed the accessible parking space because of his combat injuries, how he'd waited patiently for 20 minutes despite increasing pain, and how he'd approached Jessica politely asking her to move her illegally parked vehicle. When he reached the part where Jessica had mocked his service, his voice wavered slightly but he pushed through, repeating her exact words about being more careful playing soldier and how real heroes don't play the victim card. The courtroom audience reacted with audible gasps and angry murmurs, but Judge Judy raised her hand for silence, her face an unreadable mask as she listened to every detail. Michael described how her words had triggered memories of the IED attack, how he'd spent that entire night unable to sleep, how his children had asked their mother why Daddy was crying in the garage, and how he'd needed emergency counseling sessions at the VA to process the emotional trauma of being publicly humiliated for his sacrifice. When it was Jessica's turn to speak, she stood with theatrical confidence and launched into a prepared statement that her expensive attorney had clearly crafted to portray her as the real victim in this situation. Your Honor, this entire lawsuit is a calculated attack on my reputation and my livelihood. I'm a successful businesswoman who's built my career through hard work and dedication. On February 14th, I made a simple mistake parking in the wrong space for a few minutes while running a quick errand. Mr. Torres approached me aggressively, and when I tried to explain that I was only going to be a moment, he became confrontational and threatening. She claimed that her words had been taken completely out of context, that she'd simply suggested he didn't need that specific space at that specific time, and that the video footage had been edited to make her look worse than the reality of the situation. She said that Michael had intentionally caused this incident to go viral because he wanted to extort money from her, and that his lawsuit was nothing more than a professional victim exploiting sympathy for veterans to get a payday he didn't deserve. The arrogance in her voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and several audience members shook their heads in disbelief at her audacity. Judge Judy sat perfectly still during this performance, her hands folded on the bench, her expression revealing nothing, but the slight tapping of her pen against the wood was the only sign of the fury building beneath her calm exterior. When Jessica finished her statement and sat down with a satisfied smirk, clearly believing she'd successfully defended herself, Judge Judy leaned forward slightly and said in a voice so quiet it forced everyone in the courtroom to hold their breath, "Miss Martinez, I've reviewed all the evidence in this case very carefully." She reached for a folder on her bench and opened it with deliberate slowness. "Let's watch the video footage, shall we?" The courtroom screens came alive with crystal-clear security camera footage showing Jessica's Mercedes parked in the handicapped space with no placard visible. The audio was perfect, capturing every single word Jessica had said with devastating clarity. There was no editing, no manipulation, just raw documentation of her cruelty played back in front of millions of viewers. The footage showed her laughing, showed her mocking gesture when she referenced Michael playing soldier, showed her friend recording and laughing along with her, and showed the moment she told the elderly Vietnam veteran to mind his own business. When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Judy closed the folder and locked eyes with Jessica, who had gone noticeably pale as she realized that her lies about being taken out of context had just been completely demolished by video evidence that 12 million people were now watching. "Would you like to revise your testimony, Miss Martinez?" Judge Judy asked, her tone making it clear that this was less a question and more a final opportunity to salvage even a shred of dignity before the hammer fell. Jessica Martinez's face had transformed from confident arrogance to visible panic as she realized the walls were closing in around her lies. She stammered that the video didn't show the full context, that Michael had been aggressive first, that she'd felt threatened by his tone, but every word that came out of her mouth only dug her grave deeper. Judge Judy let her talk, watching with the patience of someone who knew that giving arrogant people enough rope always resulted in them hanging themselves spectacularly. When Jessica finally ran out of excuses and fell silent, Judge Judy stood up from her bench, a rare move that sent a visible shiver through everyone present because they knew something extraordinary was about to happen. She looked directly at Jessica Martinez and began speaking in a voice that was somehow both quiet and thunderous, every word landing like a physical blow. "Miss Martinez, my father served this country in World War II. I grew up understanding that freedom isn't free and that the people who sacrifice their bodies and their peace of mind to protect our nation deserve our deepest respect and gratitude." Judge Judy's voice grew harder with each sentence. "You stood in a parking lot on Valentine's Day and mocked a Purple Heart recipient for injuries he sustained defending your right to drive that Mercedes and shop at expensive stores and live your comfortable privileged life without ever hearing gunfire or watching your friends die in explosions. You didn't just make a parking mistake. You made a moral one. You revealed the ugliness of your character for everyone to see." She pulled out additional documents from her folder. "I contacted the Veterans Affairs Office. Mr. Torres was awarded the Purple Heart after an IED attack that killed 2 of his fellow Marines and left him with injuries so severe he spent 8 months learning to walk again with limited success. He lives with chronic pain every single day. He has nightmares about that attack every single week. And you had the audacity to call his sacrifice playing soldier. The courtroom was so silent you could hear people breathing as Judge Judy continued her systematic destruction of Jessica Martinez's defense. You claim he weaponized his veteran status? Let me tell you what weaponizing actually looks like. It looks like you using your wealth to hire expensive lawyers to intimidate a disabled veteran into silence. It looks like you countersuing him for $75,000 to punish him for daring to hold you accountable. It looks like you posting on social media calling him a professional victim while you're the one crying about how this lawsuit is ruining your reputation. Judge Judy's eyes were blazing now. Your reputation isn't being ruined by this lawsuit, Miss Martinez. Your reputation is being ruined by your own documented behavior that 12 million people can now watch and judge for themselves. Then came the moment that would break the internet and generate 80 million views across every platform. Judge Judy leaned forward and delivered the 10 words that destroyed Jessica Martinez completely. You don't deserve to share this country with him. The courtroom erupted in applause that the bailiff didn't even attempt to quiet because Judge Judy herself seemed content to let it continue for several seconds. When silence finally returned, she delivered her verdict with absolute finality. Judgment for the plaintiff Mr. Torres in the amount of $45,000. Furthermore, Miss Martinez, you will pay an additional $25,000 in punitive damages for your malicious behavior, $15,000 to cover legal fees, and you are ordered to complete 200 hours of community service at the VA hospital where you will spend every Saturday for the next year helping actual disabled veterans and learning what real sacrifice looks like. I am also referring this case to the California Bar Association regarding your real estate license and to the district attorney for possible perjury charges. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck like thunder. If this moment of pure justice made you believe that accountability still exists in America, smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell because I'm bringing you more cases where entitled people face the consequences they've earned. Comment below telling me what you think Jessica's punishment should have been. Share this video with everyone who needs to see what happens when you disrespect those who served. Remember, karma doesn't forget and neither does the internet. Don't be a Jessica Martinez. Respect our veterans. Show basic human decency. Because eventually you'll face someone like Judge Judy who cares more about truth than your bank account, and your arrogance will be destroyed in the most public way imaginable. Justice isn't just served, it's served with millions watching.